Good afternoon, and welcome to this Institute for Policy Research Distinguished Public Policy Lecture. I'm Diane Shanzabat. I'm the director of the IPR here at Northwestern, which is one of the nation's oldest and most prominent interdisciplinary social science research institutes. Our IPR faculty, which is more than 160 strong, conduct innovative research and tackle some of the country's most pressing social issues, from education and inequality to social safety nets and gun violence. Now, in addition to conducting excellent interdisciplinary research, we also serve as a nexus of policy-relevant research discussion on this campus and beyond. And one of the key ways we do that is by bringing top researchers and policymakers to our campus for distinguished lectures like these. And to that end, I am so happy to welcome back one of our own, former faculty fellow, Jen Richeson. Jen is the Philip R. Allen Professor of Psychology at Yale, where she also directs the Social Perception and Communication Lab, which studies the ways which social group memberships and affiliations, such as race, gender, and socioeconomic status, affect how people think, feel, and behave. Her research examines how people identify and respond to social injustice and inequality. She's authored or co-authored more than 100 scientific articles, published in leading journals such as Science, PNAS, and many, many psychology journals. In true IPR fashion, she straddles the world of research and policy making, and currently serves as one of President Biden's appointees to his Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Jen received her PhD from Harvard, and after a stint at Dartmouth, came to Northwestern and to IPR in 2005. To our great dismay, she moved to Yale in 2016. Now, she has received too many awards for me to name them all. But one of the most important ones came while she was at IPR, when she was named a John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Genius Fellow in 2007. She's also a fellow of the American Psychological Association, the National Academy of Sciences, and the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation. Most impressively, to my mind, however, the Oprah magazine recently named her one of 10 women to watch. Our friend Jen is a trailblazer in expanding our understanding of how different social and racial and ethnic groups perceive and interact with one another. We are so fortunate today to have her back to talk on the mythology of racial progress. Please join me in welcoming our Jen back to the
Thank you so much. There's some maneuvering. Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. All right, go train. Look good. I am incredibly happy to be back at Northwestern. It's really good coming home. I so appreciate the invitation, the opportunity, and friends and family just coming on back. Thank you. Today, I do want to talk about this work we've been doing, which I call the Mythology of Racial Progress. But I first want to take you back just a few years ago and introduce you to this gentleman. His name is Bob Smith. At the time, he was 75 years old. And this is Bob standing out in front of, I do something. Oh, we have things. Oh, you don't want to hear about ESPN? Look, aren't there games and things on White House? I think it's on that.
Just remind us of what a great basketball season we had this year at Northwestern. Okay. Beautiful.
Okay, better about it? Okay, if it comes back, then we won't force it. So this is Bob Smith, and this photo was taken just a few days in 2020 after George Floyd had been murdered by the Minneapolis police. And Bob is standing in front of the courthouse in his town in Mississippi, where in protest and in support for civil rights broadly, but obviously against police brutality. And it's an incredible thing for anyone to do, and certainly someone to do at 75, but this was not Bob's first protest. In fact, here he is back at the March for Voting Rights in Selma, which of course is now Bloody Sunday, with Kwame Ture, and being arrested and the subject of police brutality back when he was a much younger man. And Bob, of course, had been involved in civil rights causes his entire life, starting as a young man and still is active today. This was that same protest. So when this story started getting attention on social media, I think there are many reasons. One, I mean, what a remarkable human being, right? But also, it was for many, for many people, it was a moment where they had to reconcile how is all of this still happening? Some people said, how is this happening again? Why do we still have to protest these things? And even worse, how is it that the same people are still protesting these issues, these injustices? And so I think one way that I started to think about it was that for a moment, our narrative of racial progress, or our mythology of racial progress, was just sort of punctured a little bit. Right? So what is this myth, this narrative? My students and colleagues and collaborators and I have been doing some work that we think bears on this idea that one of the dominant narratives in our country, and in some others, but especially ours, is the belief that racial justice, social egalitarianism broadly, but especially when it comes to race, is automatically, naturally getting better in a largely linear fashion over time. And so yes, while we will acknowledge sometime in the past where things weren't so great, or not as great, maybe slavery, maybe civil rights, Jim Crow, surely with some, notable corrective measures, we get back on track and then things begin to unfold again, linearly, naturally. And so much so that, look, we elected a black man as president of the United States, right? And in fact, many people argue that this was the dawn of a post-racial, they did not say post-racist, but they said post-racial United States. Okay. So this narrative, this mythology, we argue, is not only operating, but it has some important implications, including how, whether, to what degree we perceive racial equality or inequality that is currently among us. And of course, the extent to which we do not perceive racial inequality, then it's unclear what we will do or think we need to do in order to create more equity, right? So today I just want to spend some time in this lecture engaging you all with this idea of mythology of racial progress. I'm going to present some evidence for it, or what we think is evidence for its operation in the misperception of racial economic equality, and then spend some time talking about what some of the underlying psychological science that we've unearthed. I am a social psychologist, and then I'll spend hopefully a few minutes saying, maybe convincing all of us that all of us are implicated in this. We're always doing it all the time by looking at what I call those myths that help sustain this larger mythology, right? Beliefs we have about our country and how it's changing and how that will, of course, usher in this egalitarian future eventually, right? And then, of course, talk about some of the implications. Okay. I forgot to put the time. Somebody's timing me, right?
Got it.
Okay. All right. All right. So our first foray into this was an examination of just a simple question, which is what what do Americans believe to be the case about the state of racial economic equality in our country? Right? One of our early studies on this simply asked about 1,000 American adults representative of the nation's population this simple question. For every $100 of wealth accumulated by the average white family, how much wealth has the average black family accumulated? Right. We asked participants to indicate their responses on this cute little slider scale from 0, meaning white Americans, the average white family has all the wealth, and average black family has 0, to 200, complete reversal, and indicated on the scale that 100 means there's equality. Okay, black and white families have about the same amount of wealth. All right, feel free to do this at home. And then we asked for judgments across time. So we said, okay, what was it in 1963, right, in 1980, something or other, right? So across 12 time points, starting in 1963, ending in 2016, we collected these data in 2016. Okay? All right, so 85, right, and we picked dates for which there are known, at least close to known answers, right, where the federal government has collected data bearing on this question and can provide credible, still estimates, but benchmarks for what reality, right, what the case was in each of these states. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is a graph of the data from this study, where we have on the y-axis what on average participants said the share of black wealth was for every $100 of white wealth. Okay, so 100 would mean equality, right? Everything below would mean something less than that. Okay, and then across the x-axis is the year that people were estimating for. Okay? The red dots in the eventually line will be the estimates participants made, so the perceptions, and the yellow will be what I'm calling reality, or what the federal benchmark data suggests is true or was true then. All right, okay. All right, so these are the data from perceptions, right? So what you can see here is that on average, participants in the study thought that black families, in 1963, black families had just less than half of the wealth of white families. And you can see that they then estimate some share more of that across time. Okay, getting all the way up to 90% of the wealth of white families in 2016, okay, as an estimate. This is reality. Okay, so according to federal benchmark data, in 1963, black families had around $5 for every wealth, for every $100 of wealth the average white family had, and then in 2016 it was $10. If you're wondering, it's about $13 now. Okay, so some increase, some closure of the gap, but clearly not close to the reality of the gap. Okay, so you can see that both in 1963, and of course it's even worse when they're making estimates for 2016, in part because we argue this belief in this narrative of racial progress. Okay? Right, this we think is the operation of the racial progress narrative. Well, why do we think that? One, you saw that upward linear trend. You also see that it's much bigger here than in 2016 than in the past. And importantly, you know, it's really hard to be this wrong on average. It's like an average of 1,000 people to be this wrong about anything, right? And we're not in this game to show how wrong people are about anything, right? What we're trying to do is understand what is operating cognitively, motivationally, right, to lead people to report something that's as wrong as me saying the sky is yellow, right? Actually, it's a possible value, so let's pick something else, right? That's how wrong this is. So we now know some reasons why this is wrong. Again, I mean, why people get this so wildly inaccurate, right, for 2016. One, and it's far more inaccurate than people are if you ask them. If I asked you right now, what do you think black-white wealth equality is? Well, in 2016, or what are we in 2023? What year is it? Post-COVID year 3, right? Well, you're likely not to say not, 90, right, on that same scale. You're probably going to say something closer to 60 or 50 or whatever, something that's more accurate, right? So we know that part of this is so inaccurate because of the upward pressure of having made so many estimates, right? Because we ask people that to tell us what it was in 1985. Okay, now tell us what it is in, whatever, 2000. All right, so at least we thought that was the case based on some other data. But we tested this across a few studies. I'll tell you about one. There's just this straight idea that if I'm led to invoke or think about the passage of time, I am likely to assume that things are better now than whatever that earlier time point is, right? That's the logic. So we did this in a very straightforward way. In one study, we had participants, again, a new sample of participants, make an estimate for black, white, wealth equality, same type of slider, in 2016, which was the present at the time, right? Or we had them still make that judgment, but they first were asked to make an estimate of black, white, wealth equality in 1963. Okay, so just those two, or just the one, right? So our argument is that those who are only making the single estimate will be more accurate, although, than those who are asked to make both. Okay? And like I said, they're sort of closer, still really inaccurate, but closer to reality than when they're asked to make both. Okay. All right. So this mythology, right, we're arguing, this idea is distorting our perception of reality. Okay? It turns out it's also shaping expectations for the future. Right? So even if you thought, well, surely things have gotten better since 1963, Jen, come on, what are you talking about? It turns out this underlying belief is not limited to what's happening right now. It also shapes what we expect to continue happening, right? Without intervention. Okay, so we see a little bit of evidence of this in a different study. Again, new sample of participants here, where we're asked them about the present, which by this time we did the study, it was 2019. And then we also asked them for projections in the future. Again, same slider, same metric, same description. By the way, I should have said earlier, we gave them the definition of wealth before we did any of this, just to make sure people know what we're asking them to make estimates of. And what you can see here, asked about the present. Here, they do something again around 60, which seems to be what they do a lot. Actually, people center on. But then, same participants, what do they think about what's going to be in 2050? So 30 years from now, they assume again, largely closed. Okay, so this expectation is there, right? This linear progress naturally unfolding, like absent any intervention. So before I go to this, let me just say we obviously have done a lot in this domain with wealth. It's also been well. I'll say this next. Let me do this first. Okay, so. Couple of things you might be like, all right, well, yes, okay, wealth is complicated and we don't really know what that is. And then also it is true that it's one of the most stubborn, meaning it moves so little, marker of any kind of economic outcome and also other outcomes. So, yeah, you rigged the game, which, yeah, we did. No, that is true. So we wanted to see, do you get similar patterns of overestimation when you do something else, right? Another economic outcome. And then also looking at times that aren't so connected to societal racial change, right? So it's the 60s that sort of invokes change. So, we want to use some of those. So these are estimates of income equality, not wealth, okay? So earnings, wages. Here, we're looking at how much people overestimate compared to federal benchmark data. So we've subtracted the estimates of that data from the benchmark data from the estimates, right? So greater numbers are overestimates of equality. Note, negative numbers are actually underestimates, okay? So what do we find here? These are two studies, samples of black and white Americans. And what you can see is people on average are relatively accurate about income inequality in the past. Okay, if anything, they're a little bit too pessimistic, and we do see this happening. from time to time. But then when they're asked about 2013, you see again, they're overestimating quite a bit. Okay? So again, this idea that surely, yes, things have gotten better, and surely they have. It's just that our beliefs about how much better outpace reality. Okay. So you might be wondering, for that, what I was going to say before. We have replicated this many, many times. Other labs have shown it, both on economic outcomes, perceptions of upward mobility. Former Northwestern graduate students, David Millay, and, oh gosh, Mesman's former student, Alex Froman, have now shown this in perceptions of how much the Black-white academic and Black-Latinx academic achievement gaps have closed, that people overestimate how much progress has been made, right? So, you know, it's been shown in a lot of domains, and it's quite a robust and reliable finding. All right, so who is doing this overestimating? Well, the answer, hopefully, you're getting is we all are. We're all doing it, okay? But some of us more than others, and we think for some interesting reasons. We do know, just on the data we had collected at this time, that white Americans tend to overestimate, make more optimistic estimates than racial minority Americans, and high-income Americans tend to do so more than their lower-income counterparts. And in fact, both matter. So if you break down the data I just showed you by race and income, again, these are overestimates of, here it's a composite of economic equality indicators, so income, wages, earnings, a few things. But you can see, on average, high-income white Americans are doing it more, overestimated more than low-income white Americans, and less so for Black Americans, but you can also see the racial gap. Okay? So, arguably, those most likely to have more information about how race and class pattern opportunities and outcomes are less likely to overestimate, in this domain at least. Okay, so why, right? That's the big, big thing. Why is this happening? We think, of course, it's mostly determined. There are any number of socio-demographic factors that are leading to this. One of the biggest ones we think is the just social stratification of our worlds, the segregation of our worlds, right? We still very much live in incredibly segregated spaces, and in fact, the people who are most segregated place by place are high-income white Americans. They live the most segregated lives right now. And so some of it's lack of access to any of this information. That's not all of it, of course, but that's some of it. Right? But of course, again, most of our time is spent looking at the underlying psychological science, right? What is happening here? And a lot of it's on the motivation that we have to believe what is so about our country and, of course, about ourselves. Okay, so, you know, one of the most reliable predictors of these misperceptions is the belief in another prevailing narrative in our country, and that's the American dream. Right? So the belief that surely through hard work, effort, anybody can make it, anybody can achieve. In fact, you will achieve, right? This is such an important dominant narrative in our culture. And of course, for that to be true, it can't also be true that there are persistent structural barriers like racism or sexism or really any of them, right? Those two don't work together. And certainly you can't hold on to your meritocracy beliefs if you also have a clear understanding of structural barriers to inequality, right? So we just tested the extent to which people who generally have similar type beliefs, in this case it's called the belief in a just world, it's just a measure of the extent to which you think society is, you know, people get what they deserve, meaning what they work for, that society is just. So the opposite of an understanding of the structural patterning by race of many societal outcomes, especially economics, right? The extent to which people believe this, we think the more likely we are to overestimate the current state of racial equality. All right, so we just looked at this. This is just one study. You see it in almost every study we run where we collect this data. You get a very similar result. This is, again, a composite of estimates of equality, or economic markers of equality across time, everything standardized, just pin it. But what you can see is that just world beliefs predict the extent to which people believe that racial equality has occurred, right? They believe that there's more racial equality on these economic markers, and that's true for both black and for white participants, and equally so, right? So there's this motivation to believe that the world is just and fair. Well, guess what? If the world is just and fair, then it should also be the case that by now, right? We're talking about the past. So by now, whatever now is, 2013, 2016, 2020, whatever it is, surely there should not be these racial gaps on these economic markers. That's how the logic goes. And again, we know, so people overestimate. All right? So that's one side. And we think that, again, also this belief actually shapes how people try to answer even that basic question, right? For instance, they come to think of people, right? Who comes to mind are people who will allow them to say, oh yeah, the wealth gap is sort of closed, right? So in this case, right, you've got this question again, and maybe some of you did this, no need to out yourselves, it's okay, we all do too, I've done this, right? When you encounter this question and you're trying to answer in a way that affirms your belief in racial progress, who do you think of? Who might you think of? The Obamas, LeBron James, who's apparently still playing Oprah, right? Right? That's who is coming to mind, and that's exactly what we thought was going on. So we have tested this a couple ways. I'm going to talk about one of these, and that's just a very simple not intervention, just a very similar experiment where we did some things. So either people just answer that question the way they always have, with no additional information provided. Okay, that's just a blank control. Or before they did it, we said, let's just introduce you to America's top 5 black billionaires. And we provided some information. This is a different list now. Things have changed since this, but most of these people are still on, okay? And by the way, at the time, there were only 6 black American billionaires, period. So that's probably why we stopped at 5. All right, so we gave them that information, which we thought, okay, if this kind of thing is happening anyway, the number that people come up with, the estimate they make, should be similar to when we don't give them any information. All right, you guys with me? All right, great. All right, a third set of participants, based on random assignment, we're shown this instead. Let's tell you about America's top billionaires. And they got the top 5 at the time, who all happened to be white men. But then we said, and you can see each one, there's a sense of how many billions at the time they had. But then we said, oh, and by the way, this is the richest black American. And you see he's like, his wealth is like all the way down there, right? He only has 1 billion. That's the smallest white line, right? So, but it sort of makes the contrast, right? So if you're trying to do this search for, okay, well, surely there's some really wealthy black people, right? And that's what you're doing to help generate your estimates, this should disrupt that process a little bit. So what do we find? Okay. We expected that participants in the control and that sort of black wealth Stanley top billionaires would look similar, but more importantly, overestimate or make estimates of equality. Everyone's overestimating. So black, white, wealth equality that are higher, more inaccurate than people in that sort of salient comparison condition. Okay? And that's what we found. Okay, so we're saying that because people are motivated to see society as fair, especially with one race, and less inequitable, they engage in cognitive processes that will lead to an answer that is palatable. Okay, that's pretty fine. All right, and of course, right, the biggest motivation over them, in some sense, this belief in racial progress overall is motivated, right? We want to believe that our country is getting fairer rapidly for sure, but also over time, right? It's part of our ethos, so to speak. So, you know, there are many ways to look at this, but one sort of we've done lots of studies on this as well, but one way that we try to, you know, think about this is, okay, well, what if we just disrupt it straight on? We just say, you know, in a lot of outcomes, actually, in the past 50 years, now 60 years, there is still a lot of inequality, right? Not on economics necessarily, but we just sort of try to, you know, undercut that narrative a little bit, and then said, okay, so now tell us what you think Black white wealth gap is. Okay, so we're trying to disrupt this progress narrative to see if we can just tell people something like this, which we did, randomly assign some to read about the continuing legacy of racism on all kinds of outcomes in individuals' lives, right? Individuals harbor fairly high levels of racial bias, blah, right? You talked about implicit bias in one of versions of this, okay? But the point is that racism still patterns the way people's outcomes, right? In a sort of fashion that's not identical, but not disconnected from what was the case in the 1960s. Okay, and that's that condition where they got a race-neutral control condition. Okay, then we asked them to make their estimates. Okay, in 1963 and in 2016 study. Okay, so we're still looking at this time piece, right? Because we're really interested in what they think. Have we disrupted this narrative of progress by saying there's probably been less progress than you think there has been, right? You think that would be enough. All right. So we do this a little bit backwards. What do we expect to find? You know, because it seemed like a very straightforward and honestly kind of silly study to do, but we did it anyway. So this is what we found, what we expected, right? So here are the estimates of racial equality on the Y, and then across time, so judgments for the past and present from 1963 versus 2016. We expected those in the control condition, right? They didn't read about race, to do whatever we've seen in every other study, right? For people to expect that there has been lots of progress towards racial wealth equality since 1963, right? And to look like this. We hoped that that treatment would do something like this, right? Okay, well, yeah, the past was not so great. The present is better, but it's just less better than I thought, right? Given what I just read, right? Okay, maybe there's a little bit more racial inequality than I expected. I'm telling you this because this is not what we found. Instead, we found this, okay? So now, control again versus that racism treatment on the Y, again, are overestimates of wealth equality. Okay. This is control, looks like it's supposed to. All right, I guess that's good. But this is what those who read about the continuing legacy of racism did. So they refuse to budge in their overly optimistic perceptions of the present. Like, no, things are good now. So if you're telling me that things are similar or more similar now to what they were in the past, then it must be the case that the past wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Right? The slope, right, gets shallower, but because they change their perception of inequality in the past. Like, what? Right, so again, something like this is the logic, right? If we've not made as much progress as I thought, then I guess racial inequality in the past was not as bad as I thought. This is why you test interventions before you actually deploy them. And honestly, we were shocked when we got these data. Actually, Kellogg professor, Ivy Onyedioh is author on this, and IPR affiliate, and literally you had to run it again. We're like, that can't be right. There's no way that's right. Nobody would ever do that. Lots of people in their right mind would do that, and they do this. They've now done it multiple times. Okay, so this disrupting the progress narrative is not actually enough, right? It doesn't necessarily do what we think it should do, and in part because, as the Atlantic put it, they write the headlines, we write the content, Americans are determined to believe in Black progress, or I would say this progress narrative. And we are. We're really committed to it, right? We don't want to let it go. In part for lots of reasons that I'm sure Dan McAdams can tell you about far better than I could. Those narratives. So let me just say a couple of things. We are all implicated in it. We all are determined to believe in it. And we all engage in these beliefs and sort of seductive allure of them all the time. So maybe you'll agree with me. Maybe you'll raise your hand if you do this one. Okay, so what sustains this mythology? I've been thinking about this a lot because it's so strong. So there are a few things that I'm going to talk about, not all of them, but of course remember the overarching one is that things are getting better over time, largely left to their own devices, right? So what these sustaining this are, at least the ones that I've thought about most, are changes that are occurring in our society for real. These are actually things that are changing. Some of them actually are associated with more racial egalitarianism. Maybe not as much as people think they are, but they could be, at least. And so we sort of glom onto them in order to maintain our belief in this changing nation. Okay, so maybe some of these will sound familiar, or maybe some you'll be like, oh, I just said that yesterday. Okay, so one is, of course, the country is becoming more racially diverse, right? And we often think that, okay, surely that is going to result in more equality, right? It must have to. If nothing else, people just have to deal with it. I've seen that written in papers. Well, by this date, we're going to be the majority, and folks will just have to deal, right? There are other versions of it that are less harsh. But, you know, this is largely a myth, right? There is no evidence to suggest that increasing racial or ethnic diversity in this country will just solve this, again, on its own. If anything, folks in my lab, but many, many others, have shown the exact opposite. There's lots of evidence that increasing racial diversity, whether it's local, state level, or national, actually, and headlines like this, actually engender a backlash to egalitarian norms and principles, activate increased concern, in this case what we call group status threat, among white Americans, that then lead to all sorts of, let's just say, regressive policies, efforts and concern about protecting white status, the status of white people in the country as the dominant social, political, economic, and cultural group. Okay? And that leads to a cascade of outcomes we and others have shown convincingly that certainly are not consistent with things are going to get better with the presence of more diversity. Okay? One version of this that people believe is that, oh, okay, the diversity itself is not helpful or not going to do it, but it's the increased number of intermarriages and multiracial children. Well, we know that, of course, will magically or just lead to a more egalitarian country. No, and lots of people I love sort of believe this, but no. At least there's no reason why it has to, I'll just say, okay? In fact, we have been counting, categorizing, including, and of course there have been mixed race babies and interracial relationships for as long as we have been a country, and certainly for some time. This is the census, instructions. I'll just blow them up here. This is from 1870. Be very careful in reporting the class mulatto. The word here is generic and includes all sorts of quadroons, octoroons, right? People like quantifying the blood, the numbers of non-Black relatives people have, right? We've been involved in this excitement / whatever this is, enumeration of mixed race babies for some time now, and again, that has not led to any type of racial egalitarianism. Okay, so no, that's just not, that's not it, as the kids say. All right, one of my most favorite ones right now that's really in the news a lot is that, okay, right, you humans, in fact my field has contributed to this, you are so irredeemably biased. Those implicit biases, if nothing else, are run amok. You should just be taken out of the decision-making space altogether, and we should look to technology, maybe even AI. No. sorry, AI is not going to save us or any kind of technology. Not necessarily, right? Well, one, because guess what? Who are the people who are training AI? Who made the decisions? Are the irredeemably flawed humans, right? So we've already baked it in, and or the structural conditions that have produced what we have now. And there are lots of smart people on this case demonstrating that no, actually, that's not likely the case in many recent efforts to use AI to make really important, in this case, life or death decisions have gone incredibly wrong. And of course, because it scales so quickly, the harm is far greater than any individual human decision maker could ever achieve. So sorry, technology is not going to save us. This one's just rude in this minute. And as they get older, it gets ruder and ruder. But this is that, okay, well, it's, the young people, they're with it, they're egalitarian, and so, they will save us. Or we just have to wait for enough older people to die off, then we'll be fine. Right, so this one is, the one version of this, the children will save us. And we'll see if this, so yeah, it's not there. Oh yeah, have you guys seen this? Yeah. Sorry, I'm in the wrong. You figure that, okay, yeah. Right, this went viral on everything, right?
27-month-old Finnegan, pure joy at the sight of one another, running.
Oh, do you guys want to see it? I know it's Macy's joy, right? All right, they're fighting to each other, right? It goes viral. All the comments are like, see, the children, the babies, they don't have this stuff, which is true, they don't. But it's not that the case that, unfortunately, that they will be left alone to maintain that, right? It's the case that they will grow up in the smog that the rest of us are grown up in and or are producing that leads to negative, well, the stuff we see now, the racial attitudes, that are among us, right? And there's lots of evidence to suggest that, in this case, white millennials, this is some time ago when they were a little bit younger, but, and we thought they were the promise, that their views of blacks are similar to their more older counterparts. The reason why we think that young kids are more racially egalitarian than older generations is because they actually are more racially diverse, right? So you're sort of counting apples and oranges. And on implicit measures, they look identical across cohorts, okay? So no, in fact, my generation was supposed to fix it. I remember, right? We were all the post-integration baggage. We didn't have that. We're just gonna go to school and we're gonna have friends. You hear this invoked all the time, and apparently we failed. Okay? And then, we have young people engaging in some of the most terrifying and violent and racist activities we've seen in certainly my lifetime. Okay? So, importantly, this, even if these were true, right, not largely myths, it also leaves this, I'll just say the unsatisfying turn of the right? As is the progress narrative, right? It leaves us in this place where, okay, yeah, well, when those babies grow up, things will be okay. Or when, again, enough old people die off, or when we have everything, AI doing everything, right? When? And over time. And okay, but what about the people who are currently suffering under unequal, unjust, incredibly horrific regimes right now? It's just like, sorry, too bad for you, but eventually it'll be okay, so we get to feel fine about it. Like, that doesn't really work either. In fact, it reminds me of this, this quote from James Baldwin on progress and how that is heard by many folks who are suffering these injuries of inequality. You always told me it takes time. It's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my niece's and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress? So let me mostly close. I'm getting there. And thank you for bearing with me. With this idea that I hope I've convinced you that there is this mythology of racial progress that's operative in our minds. It's how we think about who we are as a nation and where we're going. And it's incredibly seductive, right? It harkens to that beautiful Kingian quote, right? The arc of the moral universe is long, but advances towards justice. It actually is hopeful in a way that animates action, right? So I get it. I am also seduced by it. But let me suggest it's also corrosive, okay? Again, I hope I've convinced you that it does distort our perceptions of what is so, right? Current racial equality. But I think even worse than that, it undermines support for efforts to actually do things that would bring about more equality or equity, right? Because if it's already so equal, or if we're converging on a more egalitarian country, a very egalitarian country, why should we intervene? Right? We see this all the time, but also in very powerful decision makers thinking, or at least their words, whether this is their actual thinking, we don't know. But Chief Justice John Roberts in the Shelby County versus Holder decision that nullified a key section of the Voting Rights Act, you can see this ideology, right? This logic. Nearly 50 years later, things have changed dramatically. There is no doubt that these improvements are in large part because of the Voting Rights Act. The act has proved immensely successful at redressing racial discrimination and integrating the voting process. Okay? So let's get rid of it. Right? Because of course that means that we have been changed. We have been evolved. Of course we know now that that's not exactly how it's turned out. And in fact, this has resulted in any number of renewed efforts to reduce access to the ballot to any number of people, largely people of color. Okay? Even in efforts to uphold policies that are known to repair past and current racial bias, in this case, the use of race in university admissions, Justice Sandra Joy O'Connor wrote, "It has been 25 years since Justice Powell first approved the use of race to further the interest in student body diversity in the context of public higher education. Since that time, the number of minority applicants with high grades and test scores has indeed increased. We expect that 25 years from now, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary," right? So like almost anticipating, well, we'll sunset this because of course, again, maybe with this small corrective, we're now back on track and things can continue to unfold naturally, right? As if these interventions are not actually what's doing the work, right? There's some other hand that's at play, right? And you know, just to be a little lighter, right? It's not that these interventions aren't important. In fact, they're very important. It's just the expectation that somehow, you know, once, I guess, we're, again, put back on track, it'll continue to unfold. This, you see this everywhere. For instance, those of you NFL fans, apparently my computer is interested in what's happening at ESPN. Maybe this is why. At some point, right, there was concern about the lack of minority head coaches, in this case black head coaches in the NFL. And you can see at some point this rule was put in place that, you know, trying to correct that, but meet the requirement to at least interview a certain number, maybe make just one black applicant for head coaching jobs. And you can see, right, that's that line there. It had a measurable impact, progress for some time. How many black head coaches do you think are in the NFL right now? This ends in 2017, and you can see it, we were up at 8. That's an all-time high. How many do you think there are now? Any guesses? 1, 2, 3. Can I get 10? No. 3. Okay, so it's, again, it's not that there hasn't been progress. It's not that that these initiatives weren't important. They certainly were. It's just that it doesn't just fix everything, and nothing is going to happen automatically. So the argument here is just that, you know, not that our belief in the possibility of progress is bad. It's that when we blind ourselves to reality in favor of mythology, we are, one, constantly reminded of how wrong we are, and that's incredibly disruptive, but it also shields us, right, from the reality, right, from the negative change, right? We focus on the positive change, the policies that have led us to be in places or on track so to speak, of where we want to go, and then we ignore all the changes that suggest this is not who we want to be, right? Increases in segregation, right? The drastic inequality in school funding that maps on to racial demographics, right? That is certainly not going to lead us to the equitable nation that people say that they are committed to and believe that we largely are. Okay, to be sure. Not saying we haven't made progress. I don't want you dancing out here or whoever's tweeting to say, Jennifer Richeson said we have not made any progress. That is not what I'm saying, right? Obviously we have made progress. Things have changed, in fact, in remarkable ways. The argument, even in the NFL, right? The argument is that we do implement policies or create the conditions on which change can happen in the more racial egalitarian direction, and those are met with often severe backlash, sometimes in the form of this, but often in other forms, right? Restrictive voting, policies that actually undermine the possibilities that whatever earlier changes, or whether it's electing a first woman as vice president, can sort of make it difficult for whatever that's supposed to represent or reflect or actually lead to for political power. It makes it harder for that to be realized. Okay? So often I say we need reality, not mythology. And I've stopped saying that because people get upset, although I do believe it. So now I say we need reality plus possibility. And you can try it home, see if it feels better to you, right? And that is a reflection in part of what Dr. King's daughter said recently about where we need to be, right? And this is in the wake of, many efforts to sanitize history in many states, so we don't, I guess we don't even acknowledge that the past was worse than it is now. We just don't acknowledge any of it, right? So in that light, she said, being truthful about the state of our nation and world does not equal losing hope. Hope sees truth and still believes in better and is willing to strategize and work for it. That which dismisses or does not seek truth but says it will be okay is naivete, not hope, right? And that's the thing, our progress narrative is naivete. Okay? Now I'll close with our lovely past president who basically said this a little bit better, right? Not better. The arc of the moral universe is long and bends for justice, that is true, but it's not bending on its own, right? It requires people doing the work, the action, the activity to bend it towards justice, and that's all of us. So before I close, I want to thank the team of folks who really did all this work that I get to talk about, including my very close collaborator and wonderful human being, Michael Cross, who's currently a professor at the Yale School of Management. And a bunch of former graduate students, current graduate students, trainees, postdocs, undergrads who have been really influential to this long and really fruitful and engaging line of research. And of course, thanks to you and thanks to my funders.